Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
Good.
I figured I would listen in today. It's been a while since I've had the chance to join Bike Ped Work Group. So,
Yeah. Is Curtis the
show
other CR?
icons, Curtis. I'm
I thought
crashing
so.
the meeting. What did you say, Eric?
I was just asking if the other CRTPO was Curtis.
Or it could be Theo could have started the meeting for him. I'm not sure.
Oh, hey, y'all. No, it's me. Sorry, I thought I was muted.
There he is.
Where's your picture? Where are you? I mean,
In an undisclosed location.
yep.
Second.
Hey, Curtis, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
If towards the end of the meeting, if there's any time, I just was wondering what this group would think. As you may know or may not know, that Sustain Charlotte and I myself was involved in the Charlotte Moves task force, and we're trying to support that in any which way we can. And we've noticed some of the towns in the county, Mecklenburg, were pushing back because they weren't, they didn't have any projects. And I know I attend this all the time, and there's projects to be had everywhere. Just, you have to narrow them down. I was just curious if the towns in Mecklenburg had any projects that could be submitted hypothetically, or projects they can identify that could be incorporated in that 1 cent for mobility if it was passed. So I was just curious if folks had any opinions on that, or we can discuss it briefly if there was time.
Okay. Yeah. I think if there's time, we can certainly, you can raise that and see if you can get a response from the folks in the room on the call.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yep. Are y'all seeing the work group agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, folks, I think we're a minute or two after 2 o'clock. Let's give it another minute or two because a few folks are still logging in, and we'll get started shortly. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get started. And we've got a few folks logging in still, but we'll let them kind of join in as. Welcome to our February Bike Ped Work Group meeting. Thanks for being available this afternoon. Got the agenda displayed now, and we've got a typical agenda of introductions, community updates. Then we've got a presentation on our MTP Bike Ped project screening process from our consultants with Kittleson, working with our RSNH on that. So what I want to do is let them go first, because I know that's going to be a good bit of discussion and maybe some good Q&A. So I want to give them as much time as we can. And then maybe after that, we can get into, of course, our community updates and talk about any other information that we want to discuss. I know Eric just mentioned he had an item he wanted to bring up. Wade, I see you on the call. Are you okay with that after we go through introductions real quick? Are you okay with getting started fairly shortly?
Yes, Curtis, we can do that.
That'll work. All right, well, I know on the call we've got Wade Walker with Kittleson, Neil Burke with CRTPO, Will Washin with CDOT, Augustine Rodriguez with CRTPO, Alex Ramondi with CDOT, Emily Chen with Kittleson, I believe. Is that right, Emily? Nice. Eric Zavril with Sustain Charlotte, Erica Martin with Mooresville, Heather Siegel with Alta, Jarrell Leonard with CRTPO, Joyce Figueroa with Mecklenburg County, Parks and Rec, Judy Dellert O'Keefe with CRTPO, Kate Cabaza with Mecklenburg County Health, Catherine Kogar with Kittleson. Catherine, are you with Kittleson also? Okay, so figure out where you're from.
Katie's an intern with CDOT.
Oh, okay.
So I invited her.
All right, it was good to have you.
Thank you.
Where did I leave off? Nick Landa with RSNH, Stuart Basham with NCDOT, Division 10, and Dr. Paula Gertha with UNCC, Susan Habina Woolard with Matthews, and Tracy Hauk with Huntersville. Did I miss anyone? Did anyone come in and join us later? No? All right, with that, I'll try to shut up and let our consultants take it away. We've got Wade Walker with Kittleson Associates. They've been working on, again, on our MCP and particularly on the bike ped elements of the RTP and MCP, sorry, and have done a good bit of work and are here to bring that to us and hopefully get some good feedback from us. So I distributed some stuff that Wade sent out yesterday. I apologize for getting it out to this group this morning. But hopefully we had a chance to look over that, and I think Wade's going to go over that with us. I'll pull those up also, unless Wade, you have a screen. Do I need to turn screen sharing over to you?
Yes, if you could, Curtis, I'll do that, and then I'm going to have when we get into the discussion, Emily will share hers and be taking notes real time.
Okay, that'll work.
Okay.
1 second, let me give you screen sharing. All right, try it now. Are you able to share?
Let me see. I believe so. And can everybody see the slideshow? Thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. I appreciate appreciate the intro, Curtis. Like you said, Emily Chen with our office is here with me today. For those of you that I know on the call, hi. For those of you that don't know, I'm Wade Walker. For those of you that I do know, that you might not know that I'm actually in Orlando now and working with Kittleson. So having been in the Charlotte area for about 15 years. Anyway, I wanted to give an update. We've been working since late last year on the bike ped portion, the pedestrian bicycle portion of the MTP. We've we had an update with you back, I believe, in December with this group, Caitlin Tobin with our office, and Caitlin is the proud mom of a new baby girl born on Saturday. So I'm filling in. Hopefully, we'll be able to do her proud, and we'll move things forward as we get along. But I wanted to start off with just kind of an update of where we've been and the kinds of things that we've been looking at, and then share with you some of our preliminary findings. We've done some preliminary screening of projects. That's the voluminous spreadsheet that you have, and then the voluminous spreadsheet that you have, as well as the map. I'll show that to you in a little bit. We can have some discussion of it. I don't expect everybody to have reviewed all of that. by the time this meeting has been going, but I would like you to take some time over the next week or so, and based on the conversation we have, be able to delve into it a little more. And please feel free to get us any additional input that you may have as well. So anyway, with that, we'll start to talk a little bit about where we've been. As you know, on the MTP, our focus has been on the active transportation piece. And so today we'll spend a little bit of time on where we were. We'll talk a little bit about the methodology that we use to develop this preliminary project list. And then we'll talk about, we'll go together into the spreadsheet and talk a little bit about the preliminary flag projects, some of the things we uncovered, some of the issues that we see with the list, and get some input. Want to spend the last little bit of time that we have. One of our scope tasks is to interview 5 peer MPOs. I want to present that list to you. We went over this list with the steering committee back a couple of weeks ago, and further discussions with the CRTPO about that. Want to present that list and maybe have a quick discussion about that. And then just any final questions, wrap up. I expect this to be very interactive. So, please feel free to jump in with any questions that you may have as we move forward. And so one of the first things that we did in the project list development was that we went into the 2045 MTP program list and we removed any projects that had funding committed and encumbered for design, right-of-way, construction. The thinking there was, in consultation with the steering committee and the and CRTPO, was that anything that has that funding attached, we can assume to be in progress or will be done. So those projects come off the list. We took, the evaluation of any projects from a myriad of plans that many of the partner communities have done or the county's done. Pretty much any plan that's out there that deals with active transportation, we took those projects and put them in a list, and then we evaluated those with this series of what we call flags, that on those plan projects and we flagged them based on criteria within the CRTPO's PED project ranking methodology. So that really comes up with the idea of the short trip, is a facility near in an area where there's a propensity and opportunity for a lot of short trips? Is there demonstrated safety issue? Are there, is it proximate to a higher service transit? Are there traffic conflicts with a volume threshold? And then does it touch an environmental justice community? I'll go through each of those criteria really quick and tell you how we came up with this initial scoring. And each of the maps off to the side show the projects that end up flagged for that specific criteria. So on short trip opportunities, we basically had 4 data points that we looked at. One was the population density, and you see how that broke down with 1, 2, or 3 points by how many people are actually living in an area. We also flagged employment density. So if there's a number of jobs, certain density of jobs, you could get 1, 2, or 3 points there. Vehicle accessibility to motor vehicle was another flag. So 1 point for, you had 10 to 20% of zero car households. If we were in an area, if a project was in an area that had 20% or more, it would rank 2 points. And then within a mile of an activity center gave you 1 point. So to get a flag under that criteria, projects needed to hit 4 or more points to be able to register a flag in that criteria. Second one was safety. Pretty easy that pretty simple methodology there. We just flagged any project that intersected areas or intersected a facility where we had a pedestrian bicycle fatality but in the last 5 years, pedestrian or bicycle fatality within the last 5 years. So any project that did that would get a flag in that category as well. Whoops, a little fast. Transit, we looked initially at flagging projects that were within a half mile of an existing or planned premium transit station, light rail stations. We also included Silver Line proposed stations in that criteria as well. And we also considered any of the park and ride, the express bus park and rides north of the city, up in the Lake Norman area as a premium transit location. Then we also flagged any project that came within a quarter mile of what we deemed a high bus ridership stop. So any bus stop that had ridership in the top 5% of ridership within the CAT system would earn a flag there as well. Again, pretty simple criteria. We flagged any project that crossed or was along a street that had an AADT of 10,000 or more. So that higher traffic, the idea that higher traffic could create conflicts. We flagged any project that were on higher volume streets. And then our final criteria was environmental justice. We had any of the zones that were shown as a high environmental justice community. Any project that touched or went through one of those zones earned a flag as well. So the idea was that we would summarize any of the planned projects across the region, and I won't say rank, but just initially screen them with this criteria and present a list that showed projects that were flagged in 2 or more of those criteria. You'll see the highlighting there and the 3 stars, very, very important, because that is one of the things that we ended up needing to change, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Our next step on this will be to review this list and this ranking criteria with this group, so that some of this is going to be qualitative. Like I said, there's a couple of issues with the ranking or with the screening. I'm not necessarily issues, but a couple of things that we need to be aware of. That the screening criteria eliminates certain geographic areas and certain projects. So we want to make sure that we get input from this group as to things that if there is something that's really important, we need to make sure that we get it on the list. And this committee's input will serve as another flag opportunity there as well. And then finally, when we get finished with this, we'll be providing that summary list to the CRTPO and the steering committee to assist them in developing determine the refined MTP project list. Really important whenever I talk about the 2 or more criteria. So I'll go to the map next. So if we talk about the projects by the number of criteria map, I had that number 2. When we ran this screening and got the initial result back about 2 days ago, by capping it, by looking at all projects with 2 or more criteria, we end up with about between 900 and 1,000 projects. I think the number was around 950, and Emily, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. So we played with the criteria, not the criteria, but we did some sensitivity analysis on the threshold. What we found was that when we increased that screening to 4 or more flags met, we end up with about 115 total projects. Now, the issue with that is, as you see in the map off to the side, they're very concentrated. There's not a lot of geographic spread. So most of the projects are within the region right around Charlotte, with one outlier down in Monroe. So that is something that we want to talk with this group about. Are there knowing that we need to provide some geographic spread on the projects that go in the list. I would just like the input of this group on how we can do that. Certain projects that you may have in your community that may not have necessarily met all the criteria, but for whatever reason, we need to make sure we include on this list. So with that, so that map off to the side is the composite of anything that meets the 4 to 5, and that's also the map that Curtis provided to you in PDF form, print out at 11 by 17, so you can see it a little better. At this point, I think I'm going to have Emily pull up the spreadsheet, and Emily, I'm going to stop sharing, and if you can take control and pull the spreadsheet up for us.
It says, yeah, it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay.
Way that I could share, or does Wayne need to share?
So yeah, let me give you screen sharing as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Curtis.
Yep. I
Great.
tried now.
Yeah. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Thank you. So these are the projects that actually show the 5 flags, 4 flags. Now, Emily, this is the one with the 4. This is the ranking with the 4 or 5, correct?
Correct. So I have a separate
Okay.
spreadsheet with just the 4 or 5 met, which was sent
Okay.
out to everyone. And then we have a composite list of every project that was in this list.
Yeah, I believe the spreadsheet I believe I sent the entire spreadsheet. So Emily, can you give just an overview of what's in the spreadsheet and the different tabs on the bottom?
Sure. So each of these tabs are color coded by the criteria that we use to screen them. So we start out with short trip opportunities, as Wade mentioned. Then we go into safety, transit, ADT, and then EJ, environmental justice. And they're separated out by multi-use paths, sidewalks, and on-street bike facilities. So if you're looking for a specific project that way and you know what type of facility it is, these tabs at the bottom can help separate them out by type. And then after that, we have a ranking all spreadsheet, which has each of the projects in there. So it ranks them by 5 flags met, 4 flags, all the way down to 1 flag met at the very bottom. And as you can see, it's a very extensive list, which is why it's not feasible to, use this entire list right now to be able to screen these projects out. So that's where we need your input in to be able to, over the next week, take time to kind of identify what you see as the most needing of review, and we can look into including those projects that the group sees as important into our screening methodology. And then we have a list of filtered projects. So this is just 4 or 5 flags, but as you can see, there's hidden rows in here. So this includes everything, but is filtered currently just by 4 or 5 flags. And then we have a tab just
Is Emily frozen or is everyone frozen? I can't tell if that's just me. Oh.
Is analyzing that essentially.
Emily, kick me if I'm wrong here, but because you are the GIS wizard, but I believe those are being done by census tract.
Yes, correct. So that list that Wade had presented with the criteria we use to define the short trips. So whether it's an activity center, whether it meets the other lists in that table, we flagged projects that fell into the census tracts that met those criteria.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the activity centers, so are schools and parks, like how are you defining an activity center? Is it just from, land use plans, like from Charlotte's comp plan, for instance? Like what does that activity center look like?
Yeah, so the activity centers were defined by the CRTPO in a separate project. I can pull up the map that shows where those activity centers are.
I apologize. I'm very new to this group, so I was not at the December meeting. So
Oh, no worries.
you may have gone through this before.
Let's see.
And it's fine if you just want to send that as a follow-up.
Yeah, I can send that as a follow-up to everyone. It's basically defining a few geographic regions where they're considered more populated and higher activity centers.
And then my last question, and then I'll be quiet for a little while. So one like big piece of these types of projects is connecting to existing network, right? So I'm just curious, like from this criteria, it's you're not really getting at that piece, or maybe you're getting at it somewhere else. So did you give that some thought, or
Yeah, map out when we were doing the screening, because it's very difficult to quantify, what segments touch each other and how best to create that connectivity. But we'll definitely look into that as in the next round of screening. And if you have any suggestions on how the best way to go about that would be, we would definitely welcome your feedback.
Yeah, so Alex, just to expand on that a little bit, one thing, basically the list came about from any plans that any of the municipalities had put out. So, from that standpoint, a lot of the plans were developed with an eye toward connections or extensions of existing facilities. However, like Emily said, that is one thing that's a little hard to quantify. And that's why we did add the commentary and input from the working group. As I certainly think that any project that may not be on this list or any project that is on this list that didn't hit the 4 or 5 flags, yes, please let us know, and that would, we could certainly include that as one of the flags for the input from the Ped Bike Working Group.
awesome. Yeah, I'm just thinking about how we leverage things that are already planned,
Right.
Facilities we already have on the ground, just to create that network that complements itself.
Right. And I think, whenever I talked this over with Neil and Nick last week, I had really grand plans of us going through this list and, kind of talking about each one and making some conclusions. And then, 2 days ago when we ran the initial screen and saw the, 2 days ago when we ran the initial screen and we saw almost 1,000 projects, it was like, well, that's a little too voluminous to really go through. We'd be here, 20 hours or whatever. Even at 115, I'm not going to ask everybody to go through this today. I know you just got this information this morning, but we did want to provide you with the entire spreadsheet as well as the map. If you want to take some time over the next week and chew on it, please take a look at it. Send us back any comments or questions, or shoot us a question if you have a question about it. We don't have to go through this today, but if there is something that is, really a burning something that you want to talk about today, by all means, let's talk about it. And Susan, hi. Been a while since we've talked. So were the Bike Ped Working Group criteria for the project selection considered as criteria for this exercise? Emily, I was not part of the December meeting, so I'm not necessarily clear on what those criteria are. I do know we kind of took the CRTPO ranking criteria, so projects that would end up ranking well with the CRTPO criteria, which aligns with some of the other funding criteria, was kind of what we looked at. But are there other specific criteria that you want to ask about?
Yeah, sure. So some of our criteria goes, I'm sorry, Nick, were you going to say something?
I just wanted to clarify that I think you both are talking about the same criteria, because I'm pretty sure, Wade, if I'm not mistaken, you use the updated TAP bike ped criteria that this
Right.
work group developed. So I think you both are
Okay.
talking about the same criteria. Just wanted to make that
Yeah,
clarification.
but then like Alex's question about like connection to existing facility, that's part of our criteria. The activity center question, that's also part of our criteria, where there's heavier weight placed on different levels, you know, a higher use of the activity center. So I guess I am not understanding how that is entirely reflected, and maybe we need your presentation in addition to the table and the map to get a better understanding of how this criteria was derived, because I think if you
Okay.
used our TAP criteria, that could have been factored in.
Okay. Okay, Curtis, if it's okay with you, as soon as we get done, I will send you this slideshow if you wouldn't mind distributing it to the group, so then they have all the information in one place.
Sure. Will do.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Emily was talking about the activity center criteria. I'm curious if it matches kind of what we think that is too.
And I had a similar question. I thought you guys may have used some of the activity center information from the model, from the land use model. Is that what? Yeah. Okay. I see Nick. Nodding.
Sorry, Curtis, didn't mean to
There you
interrupt, but I'm pretty sure, and Emily, maybe you can confirm after the meeting, but for the MTP, we've typically defined activity centers using the MCM model, the community viz model that was developed for the CRTPO planning area and really for the greater region. And those activity centers were updated recently. And we use those activity centers to evaluate roadway projects for a couple different criteria. And if I'm not mistaken, we grabbed those same activity centers for this screening exercise. And I also want to be clear, and I don't want to confuse the group, but I want to be clear that this was intended to be an initial screening, not intended to necessarily rank all these projects in some sort of priority order. And we do acknowledge that this group has done a ton of work already to update that TAP criteria. And so we didn't want to recreate a new criteria per se and evaluate all these 115 projects necessarily in that priority order, because you guys already have a criteria for that. But we're trying to get a pool of projects that we can recommend for inclusion in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And so we wanted to screen all of the projects from all the existing plans in the entire CRTPO planning area, which I don't think has really been done at this scale, and then somehow narrow that list down so that it's more digestible. And then you all now can take this a little bit smaller list and give us your feedback like Wade has reiterated.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that was understood just from a big picture perspective, and I'll stop there.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Nick, and I think that's important. You know, literally, we ran this thing for the first time, and you know, we had to really be careful with how we titled it, because it by no means is this any kind of ranking. It is just presenting the information of which projects would hit certain criteria, knowing that there's other things like Erica, you made the you have the question in the chat about what's the plan to get geographic representation throughout the MPO, and that is, you know, that's certainly one of the criteria, and that's one of the criteria of why we wanted to include the input of this group as one of the primary criteria for project selection. So, you know, we wanted to present the information with the with these different triggers and these different flags, just so you could see how different things fell out and what that volume of projects were with those different criteria. But it's by no means any kind of a ranking or any kind of an answer at this point. It's simply a way of being able to present the information that like Nick said, makes it a little more digestible with the volume of things that we're actually looking at.
Again, Veda, this is Srinivas. I have a question more related to the methodology. Kind of being a researcher in that area, right? I know you mentioned about short trips, population density. Is it based on, let's say, TAZ level data, census data? Are we looking at, let's say, within 0.25 miles? Does it vary for pedestrian related as well as bicycle related projects?
Yeah, well, the short trips is going to, it's census level data, so census tract data. Emily, again, correct me if I'm speaking incorrectly there.
Yeah, that's so short trips and EJ were census tract level, and then ADT was road segment level. Transit was, like we talked about in the presentation, quarter-mile radius level, and then safety was again segment level with fatalities and what roads had those fatalities.
Yeah, and as far as any kind of distance, it was basically projects that were located within or touching or transecting different census tracts that had those short trip opportunity criteria.
Correct.
Any plans to consider or recommendations to consider land use characteristics either now or down the road? Just out of curiosity.
You know, I think some of that should be covered with the activity centers, with the activity center criteria. As far as delving in, you know, again, with where we started on this with projects, you know, starting with all the projects that were included in any plan that a municipality would have done, you know, the assumption would be that some of that has already been considered in the development of those plans and the integration of the facilities with the surrounding land use, or, you know, in some cases, the facility being able to support or enable, support an existing land use or even enable a future land use. So, you know, that we're hopeful that the activity center criteria confirms some of that.
The reason I bring it up is because census data are not, I mean, typically updated once every 10 years, right? And a lot depends on how you're able to project or update, especially if you're looking at 2018, 2019, 2020, right? So would that be a better measure? I mean, we've been kind of exploring a little bit in that area. So I was kind of curious to see how you have been looking at it as a practitioner or as a consultant. So.
Yeah. Sorry, just trying to keep up with chat questions too.
So with the short trip opportunities, two of the criteria included in that table, I guess the presentation is not handy, but with that presentation, we had that table listing the 4 criteria considered in the short trip opportunities metric. And 2 of those included residential density and employment density. And that data was a little bit more recent than the last, it was from the American Community Survey. So using census tracts, but also not necessarily from, you know, I guess 2020 census data hasn't been published yet, not necessarily from 2010 census data. So it is a little bit outdated. It was from about 2014 to 2016, but it's still, you know, representative of a lot of the trends that we see in the region. It might, like I said, might not be exactly perfect or up to date, but it still provides a representation of, you know, criteria in the last few years that have been ongoing.
Sure. I mean, we have explored all the 3 census TAZ level data as well as American Community Survey data. And it's always challenging, so I understand. So, but I was kind of looking at future plans or recommendations, how we could do differently or better down the road.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan, I see your question on the searching CTP numbers. Curtis, is that something you could address?
Yeah, I think so. We have, the CTP database and some of our online mapping that you can use to search by number. I think Kilson's include some of that in their mapping those facilities by CTP number. As far as the unspecified to unspecified, those project limits, that's pretty common in the bike ped layer. Some of those segments just were not, in every case, not well documented at the local level. So as we update the CTP and as folks submit new projects, we're going through and noting the beginning and end to and from location, those project limits. But in some cases, it's just you'll need that geographic component, that visual component to search by project number and look exactly where the project is located or where that segment is
We
located.
do, but when you go to the online map, there's no number, there's no way to search for number. I can search for an address, but if I don't know where unspecified to unspecified random greenway is, what do I have to cross-reference to find said map or project numbers?
Yeah, that's a good point.
They're asking us to look through this list and flag, but if it's like the first several are unspecified to unspecified and we don't know where that's at.
Would it be helpful if we sent around a GIS file of all these projects that this list was derived from?
Yes.
Okay, we can do that.
I think
So-
Alex had some more questions in there too, in the chat box.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
right.
Thanks, Susan. I think I got a little confused with the employment density because I'm thinking about the 2050 MTP and how we're doing that for roadways. So that's probably mute. But I'm curious, if you did flag serious injuries, that might give you a greater geographic spread. I don't know if you've tested that. I know it would probably pop up a lot more, but serious injury is one step away from being a fatality when you're walking or biking. So.
Yeah, understood. And Emily, you've been working with the data. So I'm going to just kind of comment on typically the way crash data is reported, in that it's either reported as injury or fatality, and not necessarily a serious, the seriousness of the injury. Do you know if it's reported differently in this region, or is it, or Emily, I think we're probably just injury or fatality and no real gradation, right?
So the files we do have separate it out by potential injury, serious injury, and fatality. But
Okay.
the issue, as Alex was saying, is that there are so many projects that fall under potential serious injury or serious injury that it really would make this list a lot more overwhelming. So that is a really good point, though, that fatalities aren't that much different from a true serious injury. So we should. It would be helpful to find ways to include a more diverse range of accidents and how those are impacting this project list.
If I may add, most of the crash databases have 5 different categories, like you said.
Okay.
Right.
Fatal, type A, type B, type C, and PDO, property damage only. And oftentimes in the research side too, we have been combining F+A, fatal plus serious injury, are also sometimes referred to as type A injury crashes. I think it's acceptable. If you look at NCDOT crash cost facts, they also have breakdown for each type A, type B, type C, but also they give you an equivalent cost value for F+A. So in case like that kind of gives you, let's say, a justification for combining F+A.
Okay. So Emily, I mean, I think that's something we could go back and take another look at, maybe kind of the fatality plus the most serious category of injury, and see what that ends up doing to the screen.
And Emily, we have that, we map out our high injury network, at least for Charlotte. And so that's a public open source resource that's available to download if you want to take a look at that. So that would just be our, the severe injuries and fatalities.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say that one more time? What was it, Alex?
We have our high injury network as part of our Vision Zero effort, open sourced. I'm happy to follow up and send you the data as well. But I'm not sure about Iredell and Union County. I'm not sure if they have that yet, but that is available for Charlotte, pretty
Got
much
it.
all of Mecklenburg.
Thank you.
Emily and Wade, I've seen a few questions in the chat. John had a question here, this last one, regarding essentially kind of regional scale projects or bike ped segments, which kind of leads me to think about some of the criteria that we have in that adopted criteria that you guys use. I'm wondering to what degree did you try to incorporate that, our bike ped ranking criteria? Because some of those land use issues we kind of get at with our destinations, and some of those other issues we kind of get at through some of that scoring. I'm just wondering how in-depth that was used.
So the question is about regional projects, is that, and how those were included? Is that?
Or how they were maybe valued a little higher, maybe awarded.
Got it.
If
So,
they're crossing regional boundaries. Right.
got it. So a lot of these projects are included in regional scale projects such as Carolina Thread Trail, Mooresville to Charlotte Trail, and other large trails, but they're broken out as we see into segments. So the greenways and all the different segments that are in this list. So we didn't necessarily give them a higher weight per se because they were already included as individual segments. But if regional connectivity is something that we see is important, then we can definitely find ways to include that in the next round of screening.
Yeah, Emily, I'm not so sure that it wouldn't be that one way to do it might just be anything that crosses a jurisdictional boundary. You know, we could actually insert a screening criteria for projects that cross jurisdictional boundaries. And I think that would start to get at some of the more regional projects and start to highlight those as well. Other questions? Again, I know some of it's a little overwhelming. I would like to ask the group to take the information that Curtis sent earlier, and we're going to send, I guess, Emily, we need to package the GIS files, like you said, and the PowerPoint. Curtis, if it's okay, we'll get those to you later this afternoon to distribute to the group. And if everybody could take a look at everything and get us any additional input or questions within the next week, that would be helpful as we start to move forward on it. Again, any projects that you know, that we have always considered the input of this group to be one of the primary criteria in, like Nick said, being able to pare this list down into something manageable. So if there are things that members of this group want to share with us, you know, that would certainly be weighted into the list as well.
At some point, is there going to be a call from the bigger CRTPO group to include projects, but they'll have to already be shown on this list, or where are we trying to go from here?
Hey, Erica, this is Neil. I think, you know, what we're trying to do with this MTP update is we're trying to, you know, better integrate bicycle and pedestrian prioritization. So I think what we're trying to do here with the screening is to really start generating a list of bicycle and pedestrian projects that could be considered when we have, say, an annual discretionary project call, you know, in the summer, or when we have to develop a list for NCD DOT prioritization to submit bike ped projects, because in the past, the bike ped work group has kind of had to develop that list of bike ped projects for prioritization, and it's really been kind of, there hasn't been a method to that. So I think that's what we're trying to gravitate towards. I don't foresee a call for bicycle and pedestrian projects with the MTP because it's such a long range transportation plan. We're looking out to 2050, whereas you know, the scopes of bike ped projects, for the most part, you know, a community develops a scope and they're usually able to deliver pieces of it within the, you know, 5 to 10 years.
I think, Neil, if I could just add maybe a couple things for context. but I basically agree with what you said. And I think I touched on this earlier, is that there's not really one place to have this kind of comprehensive bike ped list. The last MTP really only had the funded committed projects in the STIP, and those were the only bike ped projects included in the MTP. So our thought was to have some other way to identify bike ped projects, but we also need to keep in mind that the MTP is required to be a fiscally constrained document. And as Neil mentioned, it's very difficult to put dollars to bike ped projects very far out into the future. So this would be a list that doesn't necessarily have identified funding associated with it, but it would have this initial level of screening. It would have a lot of input from stakeholders, such as mostly you all that are here in this meeting. But we're not necessarily intending to associate dollars with these projects for the metropolitan transportation plan. But it would hopefully, like Neil said, make your job easier in the future when you're looking for projects to submit for discretionary funding. You would already have this list that is sort of pre-screened. It has some criteria similar to what you already use for your TAP criteria, plus some other suggestions that you all are giving us here. And hopefully, we'll come back and meet with you after we refine this a little bit and get a little bit more feedback, and then we'll go to the other stakeholder groups that are working on the MTP and hopefully get this whole thing approved.
And Nick and Neil, I'm going to throw another wrinkle in there and tell me if this is completely off base. But I'm thinking ahead to one of our next meetings. I think Augustine wants to come and talk to us about some recommendations from the Beyond 77 study. And he's talked about the need for us to kind of look at that with an eye towards regional projects and thinking regionally rather than thinking about our individual municipalities. So should this group look at the MTP projects, this process, similarly, kind of think more about regional or the regional benefit of projects rather than just the local benefit of projects, and try to think about which of these are, again, better for all of us rather than just trying to get the local projects advanced, because that's, we have the discretionary process for that. I imagine this is something that's more high level regional benefit.
Yeah, Curtis, I think that's a good point. I think one of the goals with this is to, consider some of those regional plans that have been put together and identify those critical gaps that maybe they lie between two jurisdictions or something. And hopefully this exercise will kind of prioritize or identify some of those projects that we need to think about for discretionary and for future rounds of prioritization.
I mean, I like where this conversation is going, but the difference being that roadway projects submitted to the MTP doesn't necessarily have a funding component from the jurisdiction. Theoretically, the jurisdiction shouldn't have to pay for anything if the state is managing the project and it comes in on time and within budget. But all the bike ped projects have financial responsibility on the jurisdiction. And so as long as, this all sounds great, projects that are regional benefit, as long as it doesn't force some of the small municipalities that don't have big budgets into submitting projects that they don't have the match for and may not have the ability to create that match.
Yeah, Susan, I think that's a good point. And one thing that, Neil, last time I talked to you, we touched on this a little bit, was where do things go that may have regional significance, multi-jurisdictional significance, and could have a really good shot at some non-traditional funding sources, such as larger federal grants that I'm hopeful our new Secretary of Transportation is going to be pushing. So, where do those fall in the process? And one of the big criteria, if we kind of look back to the early rounds of Tiger and things like that, one of the early criteria was that things that were multi-jurisdictional definitely scored better in that ranking in that the grant award process. But one of the other criteria was that they needed to be part of a plan. So to be able to get some of those things into a plan, while they may sound a little blue sky, if there is some significant funding for these kinds of projects that may come out of the next infrastructure bill, you know, how do we make sure we're positioned to take advantage of that? So any other questions, or should we give everybody their homework and a timeline for getting comments back to us?
Any other questions for this project team? All right, let's give us our homework. Let's go do our thing.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you everyone for your time, and appreciate the input.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
All right, I'm gonna take over the screen sharing once again. I think. All right, and as Wade mentioned, he's going to send that stuff out later on, and I'll distribute that to the work group membership, and you all can look over those projects and that screening process. Getting back to the agenda, again, some of our community updates. Let me go ahead and let Eric pose a question to the group. He had some comments he wanted to share regarding some of their recent work and some regional projects and biped desires.
Sure.
So I'll let him take over into our other local updates.
Sure. Thank you, Curtis. I'll be quick because most of my questions were kind of answered in that last piece. And I know I'm a guest, so didn't want to interrupt in the question piece of it, but you know, we advocate for transportation, Sustain Charlotte does, and we've been mostly based in advocating in Charlotte, but with the 1 cent for mobility that hopefully we'll get before voters in the fall, that moves us to a more county-wide audience. And we've heard some of the pushback from some of the northern towns or any of the towns in Mecklenburg that there isn't a project list for them. And we could see there's plenty of bike ped projects that you all have waiting and ready to be funded. So we want to make sure when we advocate to local elected officials, the county, that we get it right. So we just ask for your help. If you could maybe say, like, you know, would it make sense that if Charlotte reached out to the local jurisdictions, to you guys, to get that list, prioritize it very much like what we just saw in that spreadsheet, but maybe towards the 2030 plan for transit or the MEC playbook that expands the greenways, so they could be ranked in regards to those projects with that sales funding, proposed sales funding, that would then be able to get that list, prioritize them, and then build support for that initiative. Because I know you all know that the biggest thing is not finding the projects, but finding a way to pay for them. And this possible sales tax would be that way that we can get these projects funded. So I would just love any of your thoughts on that. And if it makes sense that would be a way of building support and something you could bring to your elected officials to kind of get them on board with everything as well.
And just to reiterate,
everybody's quiet.
Out of the Charlotte Moves initiative, and there's a potential in the future for some sales tax.
I forget sometimes not everybody knows about that. So, but yeah, so far it's been only done locally at the city level with that task force, and we realize that it can't exist in a vacuum and it has to be connected regionally. And you know, that's where some of the pushback is coming from, and we wanted to advocate that, you know, city of Charlotte, but also, you know, the elected officials in the towns, you know, come together now, get those lists of projects out there so the public knows about them. And when that, you know, hopefully goes through and we are able to get that on the ballot for the fall, that, you know, we know what those projects are, they're identified, and you know, it's just a great opportunity that I don't want to be wasted, especially with the new administration. And if we had that local funding in place, I think that makes it more competitive as well, that we'd be able to get that federal funding. And I could
Yeah,
answer any
okay.
other questions if any. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's Susan from Matthews. Are you looking for a dialogue? Because I mean, I'm happy to share Matthews' experience with Charlotte Moves if you would like to maybe start a dialogue with the other staff members.
Sure, a dialogue that'd be great. I just wanted to see, you know, when we're advocating, you know, when we're sending letters out, we started the Charlotte Regional Transportation Coalition, which we have several neighborhood groups and organizations a part of. I could throw it in the chat as well, the link to it. But you know, we're not gonna, in the process of drafting a letter to the County Board of Commissioners and the mayors to advocate for the sales tax, the 1 cent for mobility. And I just was asking, you know, your thoughts, because I know one of the hangups is there isn't a project list. We don't have one finished in Charlotte yet either, but they're working on it, and we want it to be a county-wide list of projects. So that's just kind of wanting to get your feedback on that. Obviously, we just saw there is a bunch of lists of projects for bike ped out there. So just trying to figure out how we can figure out how to allocate that 1 cent sales tax, and how to maybe prioritize, or get you guys thinking about how to prioritize those, that they could work into the larger our list, the Charlotte list of projects as well. So they could kind of go together and we could get that list, you know, identified before the fall and communicated out to the public.
Okay, well, so if you don't mind, I'll share Matthew's experience. And so Matthews does have a list, and Matthews submitted their list to Charlotte. Matthews was involved in the Charlotte Moves. We had a representative on the Charlotte Moves task force, and that person then came and spoke with our Matthews Transportation Advisory Committee, which is a citizen group, a resident group, and about the sales tax to get initial feedback, and then presented again to the board about the sales tax. And then Mayor Vi-Lyles asked our mayor, like, hey, can you get a list together? And basically, staff had like 3 days to meet Vi's deadline, because we wanted to share it with the board. First, because our understanding was that Charlotte had a list. Now I wish I had more time. If Charlotte doesn't even have their list together, I could have spent more time on it. But basically what we did is we took the results of our downtown mobility study, which was a list of like 95 projects or something like that. And we filtered them out to projects that were about walking and biking in our downtown. We took our CIP list that address new roads, new greenways, new sidewalks, new side paths. And then we also, Matthews benefits from having the Silver Line, which is I suspect why we were invited to Charlotte Moves. So we have 4 Silver Line stations. And so then we asked our friends at Charlotte, like, how much does infrastructure around the station cost, like with Skip and Nisi? And so we just did an average cost per station for the 4 stations, and we submitted those to Charlotte. So those of you in Mecklenburg County, those are ways to get those lists over to Charlotte and to be included in this whole Charlotte Moves effort, right? So we focused on what was already in our CIP, our 10-year CIP for new roads, sidewalks, greenways, side paths, and what was in our mobility study, which just focused on the downtown. Also of note, in our CIP, we have a separate sidewalk list like outside of downtown. And so that's how we came up with our request, which was like $21 million or something like that, but they wanted a list. And so there's the list of the starting point. And I'm interested to hear, I hear Huntersville is on the call, but there's been some resistance from other towns. For Matthews, it wasn't so hard to pull together a list so that we could be included. And I know the documents from Charlotte Moves just showed Charlotte. I don't know why they didn't reach out to Curtis to pull in greenways and stuff in the whole county. Like, we have that data, and it would have been good for the staff running the Charlotte Moves task force to pull in data to indicate inclusion. But I feel like there has been outreach from Bylaws to the towns to try and bring everyone on board and to create these lists, which is, it wasn't hard for us.
Thank you, Susan. That's good to hear. That's what we need to know too. So when we're advocating, we know that these things are existing, because I think the public doesn't know that either. So we want to make sure everybody's informed that there is, this movement, and that it is a building, so because otherwise there's just one-sided story, and that's what we want to try to help educate and advocate for. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or input for Eric? And Eric, this may be something that's worthy of a topic at maybe our March meeting. I don't know if you can wait that long for input, but there may be something that folks can think about a little bit offline and come back and offer some input on.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, and just to clarify a little bit too, I know Charlotte has a list of projects and stuff from previous plans too. It's just, finalizing that list and getting it together. So yeah, I wish, Susan, you didn't feel rushed on that as well, because I think, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I think March could work too, if anybody finds that to be a value, because I think it's an opportunity we shouldn't pass by. And I know some concerns too from other towns have, this is a little too soon, too quick. Why can't we wait another year? But I think, with the new administration coming in federally, we might not be, it might be too late. If other cities like Austin, they already passed their ballot initiative last fall, so they're already in a better position than we are. So some food to first thought.
Well, I think that is the rush, though, Eric, is that the legislature is in session. And so it's going to take a legislative, the state legislature has to enable us to do a 1 cent sales tax. And so that, staff collaborates and helps each other through this and helps talk to our elected officials will better help facilitate, any of the scuttlebutt going around the legislature now, because they don't have all the information that staff has. And we're not sure who's up there talking to the legislature about this. But from like the rumors, I'm gonna say the rumors because I haven't talked to anyone from the legislature yet about this. But it seems like they don't have all the facts, at least not from my perspective. But then again, adding the clause, Matthews was brought in and sat at the table for the Charlotte Moves Task Force. So we had information possibly before other towns did.
All right. All right. Well, if you do have any input, if you think about that for a little bit and want to get back to Eric, please do. Eric, if you think about it and want to continue this discussion at our next meeting, just say the word and we can maybe add this as an item and discuss it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for letting me share that with you, and I'll put my email in the chat too.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that to us. I mean, that's something that I think we've all heard about and been interested in. So hopefully we can get some projects. All right. As far as any other updates, anyone have anything else they want to share? Any questions they want to pose to the group for group think? Anything at all?
Curtis, I'd like to mention that NCDOT, as many of you are aware, we've sold about $700 million in bonds in November, and that's shored up our finances. We're now back in a in a good position, and we're beginning to slowly release projects. I received a list of about 24 projects about a week ago, and we're in the process of working through those. A number of those are EB projects, bike ped projects. So we're getting letters out to the local towns telling them that these projects are now off suspension and can proceed. So you know, if anyone in the municipalities have bike ped projects or other projects that have been suspended, keep an eye open for some letters coming along within the next week or so.
Excellent. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
Hey, are you still updating that? I think I had a couple of lists on the website, on DOT's website. You guys still updating that? Do you know? Have you looked lately? I haven't looked. I'm just wondering if I should go pull that off.
You know, there's you're talking about the PE move forward list.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that list is updated about monthly, generally every 4 to 6 weeks. I think there was just an updated list published within the last 2 weeks. The last one was, I believe, November, mid to late November. So there is an updated list out there.
All right, cool. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Any other updates or information?
This is Susan. I am
Susan.
super excited to begin our request for experiment for advisory shoulder. There's been some for advisory bike lanes, but when I called FHWA, they didn't have any examples of shoulder. It is something that we can request experiment for. So I'm super duper excited. Oh my gosh, I'm spacing on the guy's name from Federal Highway, David, I think, was very understanding, like we're a small town, the street that I want to put the shoulder on has like 40 ADT, and the intent of the shoulder is to bring people to make a connection between two paths, not necessarily to monitor how vehicles and cyclists interact, which is typically the advisory shoulder observation criteria, but it's more so the increase in usership of the trail and the path connecting is for both walkers and cyclists. So I'm really excited. I want to get that out the door in time for the good weather so I can get a good baseline. Of course, as the weather gets warmer, that'll just generate it anyway, but it might help our experiment. And so experiments, I guess, are like 3 years. I did a couple for Charlotte when I was there and I loved it. And I'm so excited to get started on it. And then of course, our Parks Department wants to apply for a grant to do murals. But I was like, hey, FHWA, we're going to do a mural. Shh, don't tell anyone, because Federal Highway Administration, not a fan of murals. They've done some interpretation, but as long, the thing is, like, some people use murals to try and communicate to drivers, which you're not supposed to do. So we have to be very careful. First of all, what photographs I submit for our RFE, but also just what colors we're going to use for our mural. For that shoulder. So we're going to do just a one-side shoulder on this really tiny street. I can't put in a side path because there's a railroad on one side and a cemetery on the other side. And I would just like to respect both of those uses.
Cool. No, that is exciting. I want to see that. I think Marshville and their recent plan, they had a couple of advisory facilities recommended on the plan. And I was like, yeah, I want to see it happen. So yeah, hopefully that'll work in Matthews and be a good example. Where's that going to be?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what's the question?
Where in Matthews is that facility going to be?
So it's part of our heritage trail. So it'll come off of Crestdale Road where we're widening a sidewalk, and it'll connect to our heritage trail that runs along the railroad over to Town Hall. And yes, okay, yeah. Happy to do a bike trip when it's done. Y'all know I was planning a bike ride for elected officials. This not surprising, no elected officials signed up for it. So we ended up doing a staff bike ride around some of our facilities. But once the advisory shoulder goes in, definitely we need to drum up traffic on it. Yeah. Oh, the Alta did a rural bike design guide that has great guidance on advisory shoulders. And so we'll be following that.
Yeah, they're going to did Marshville's plan. Well, all right. Any other updates or news or questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, if there's nothing else, then appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. Thank you to Wade and Emily and our consultant team for joining us and sharing your process with us today, and we'll get some information back to you as soon as we can. Anything else comes up between now and our next meeting, feel free to email me and we'll be in touch.
Okay,
Everyone, we appreciate
Everybody,
you.
thank you.
thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm ready.